What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Value Script podcast, where we bring value every episode for the everyday person. Today, we're going to continue our book breakdown of the 5 love languages. I have my lovely co-host, Meredith Carmichael, sitting next to me. Meredith, when we were summarizing what we were going to talk about, you broke this chapter down really well and summarized it great. Would you like to share that with everybody?
Sure. Okay. So we're on chapter 11. And this kind of talks about what we touched on. Did you hear that? It's
earlier enough that I said everybody.
Everybody.
Like, everybody.
Everybody. All right. So gives an example of this couple that they go to Dr. Chapman and they're like, look, we're not happy, but first of all, we want you to know we don't have money problems. We both make a lot of money. They weren't arguing all the time. They really don't even fight. But their problem was they were basically like roommates. And they would each get up, go to work every day, and then come home and kind of do their own thing. And then they would come together every night and have dinner. The husband made dinner every night. And then it's kind of funny because he goes through, he's like, I do all the dishes. And then he would take the laundry out of the dryer and fold it and put it away, and he does all the yard work because she's allergic to pollen, and he would vacuum because she has a bad back. And
Sorry guys, I know this is bad. This is brutal.
Dr. Chapman was like, what does this woman do? But so he's like, I don't understand why she doesn't feel loved. Like, this doesn't make sense to me. I'm doing all these things for her. And for the wife, she's like, I just want you to sit down and talk to me. Like, we don't talk about anything. We just, kind of simple conversation, but they really didn't have any in-depth conversation. So what they realized is they were speaking the wrong love languages. And for
like
the
he was
husband,
providing tons of acts of service, and he's like, what the heck, man?
Right.
Like, I'm like putting myself out there doing all these great things. Yeah. And my wife is unhappy.
Yeah.
And he was doing a lot of I'm like, stop talking. Like that's like the list of things I'm not good at that I need to be better at, because with your love language being acts of service, as I was reading through, I'm like, man, this guy's doing all the things I need to be doing. It was really good. And so I can imagine, if I was doing all those things and then not feeling reciprocation, that would dig into my self-worth. It would dig into my feeling of, really, does my wife love me?
And for him, acts of service was his love language. So that's how he was showing love. And so he didn't feel loved either by her. And but she brings up a good point. She's like, wait, you said that you enjoyed cooking. And he's like, well, I don't mind cooking. Yeah. He's like, I don't mind cooking, but Dr. Chapman asked him, like, what would the ideal wife look for you or look like to you? And he's like, well, I've thought about this a lot. Like, I would go to work and come home and she would be cooking and I would do yard work and then come in and we'd have our meal together. And so as they were able to communicate their needs, they realized like they were just missing the boat. And he's like, wait a minute, all I need to do is come home and talk to you for 15 minutes rather than doing all this stuff to help you feel loved. Because he really was trying to be intentional about helping her feel loved, because he knew that was a problem. But because they spoke different love languages, they just weren't coming together. But it was just a great example of how, like, you might think that you're giving your spouse what they need, but if you don't really talk about it, you might be totally missing it. And it's not intentional. It's not that you're bad people or that you don't love your spouse, but you're just missing the mark sometimes. So anyway, I thought that was really great.
So I like this on page 142 at the bottom. It talks about in the context of marriage. If we do not feel loved, our differences are magnified. We come to view each other as a threat to our happiness. We fight for self-worth and significance, and marriage becomes a battlefield rather than a heaven. Mm-hmm. That was us. Yeah. 100%.
100%. I remember us both feeling like, gosh, we are so different. We just are. We're very different. And we certainly did go through that battlefield stage where everything just was awful and hard, and just like he says it perfect, like a threat to our happiness. Like that's what it felt like.
It did. It really did. And over years, like the next sentence is, we fight for self-worth and significance. Like I really did feel insignificant to a large extent, and it really did bother my self-worth. Mm-hmm. And, so I started trying to dig in, and, we've covered this a billion times, but changing the physical things didn't matter. And it wasn't because that was really the problem in the beginning.
Right.
But I didn't know that.
Right. Yeah.
And you didn't necessarily know that how you were making me feel, because we didn't really even know what to talk about.
Yeah. Well, and it really took years of counseling to figure it all out, because there was a foundational way that you viewed yourself and kind of internalized everything. And I didn't know that, and didn't recognize, neither of us knew that. Like, sometimes you don't even recognize until you can dive in with therapy and have a professional help you figure things out.
Well, that's kind of what it says in the next paragraph. It says love is not the answer to everything, right? So, which I've always said, love's the most important thing, but it's not the answer to everything. But it creates a climate of security where you can seek answers to the things that bother both of the spouses. And in the security of love, it gives you the ability to be able to discuss differences without condemnation, and you can resolve conflicts if you have the spirit of love in which you're approaching resolving these things, rather than the spirit of contention. And it's a real thing. And sometimes that contention comes because, again, you're fighting for your self-worth and significance in the relationship, but you're not necessarily fighting on the same battlefield. You think you are,
right?
But you're not, since you're not really speaking each other's languages. You could be miles apart, even though you're right next to each other. Yeah.
And when you feel secure and safe in your relationship and in the love that you have, you're able to give more. It's not like you're pouring from an empty cup, or where you feel like you're constantly trying to have your own needs met. You're able to give to your spouse, rather than feeling like, I don't know, that need to protect yourself, I think, is where it all comes from. But
like we talked about in the last episode, passing like ships in the night, like, even though both spouses in this case saw each other, they were actually serving each other in their own love languages, right? And a lot of times, again, too, like we talked about, if you're not sure what your love language is, think about how you like to give love. And that probably will help you find a clue as to what your love language is. Like, this man was providing acts of service for his wife, and she wanted to talk. Well, turns out her love language was she wanted to talk, and his love language was acts of service.
Right.
But since they weren't receiving those things, even though they were doing lots of good and like doing the right things, doing, married couple correct actions, they weren't filling the cup that needed to be filled.
Yeah.
And that two ships passing in the night, that was from the previous episode, and I'll link that at the top of the video if anybody wants to click on that to see the previous video.
Yeah.
And just at the very end, just to like wrap up this chapter, it says, can emotional love be reborn in a marriage? You bet. The key is to learn the primary love language of your spouse and choose to speak it. But it was beautiful because this couple that completely changed their relationship. From that moment, they were able to start loving each other in a way that resonated with both of them. And they, were happy and everything was great.
I love that you pointed that out, because that's quite profound at the end of that chapter, that sentence that, can emotional love be reborn in a marriage? Because that question comes up, especially in the frequently asked questions in the back. But we've heard that from, our friends and from people that we've interacted with through social media. That's a lot of times that's the question is, are we able to get our love back in our marriage? Look at all the damage that's being done, or look at the bad actions, or look at, the bad choices that were made. I don't know if we can come back from that. And Chapman answers it in the form of, absolutely, you can come back from that. But you cannot really by doing the same things that got you there, right? You have to learn to speak your spouse's love language. And if you're doing the same things, that you just keep doing the same things, like thinking, hey, someday they're going to work. They're not going to work.
It's not going to work.
It's not going to work. You need to you need to find out what really needs to be done. What actions will have profound impact by learning the actual love language of your spouse.
And I really think that most of the time, both people want that. I think when people get insecure, and then they start to put up walls to protect themselves. But if you can sit down with your spouse and really have an honest conversation, like, what do we both want? Really, what do we want out of this?
And, well, goodness. think of it's maybe I don't even want to bring this memory up because it was so terrible, but it happened to us. Mm-hmm. We were, sitting on the floor,
crying on the bathroom floor
in that bathroom in March 2021, and we asked each other that question, mm-hmm. right? Like, mm-hmm. really, first of all, do we want to stay married? Right. And what's at stake? And we talked about that, and then
that's such a heavy question,
right?
Like,
well, it wasn't necessarily out of like spite either. Mm-hmm. Like it was like, are we really going to be committed to make this work?
Yeah.
And a lot of that was directed towards me. Am I really going to be committed to make this work? And then are we willing to do what it takes? Are we willing to do what we both need each other to do to be able to get out of this? Mm-hmm. Right. And we had to.
But as an outside viewer, that shows me that both of you wanted the same thing. If you're both willing to talk about it.
Right.
You both were wanting the same thing and wanting to, you had the respect for each other to ask that question at least.
Right.
Rather than, I think in a previous episode, you had talked about how you hate seeing relationships where they just grow to just hate each other, After all these years of marriage, all of a sudden you hate each other.
Right.
So.
Well, and honestly, like at that point, we were so broken. So broken. I mean, I really feel like we were about as close to divorce as you can get without pulling the whatever.
Pulling the plug.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, at that time, it was max hurt. Max hurt being exerted.
Yep.
And I, largely from me, I was exerting max hurt on you.
Was it the red face on the scale 1 to 10 at the doctor?
Yeah.
Yes.
It was, that was the warm up.
Oh man. Yeah. But like, I don't know, even when things were at their absolute worst, I always felt like there was even the slightest bit of hope there. Like, I just felt like there really was no reason why we couldn't be great together. I was like, what is happening? What is wrong with this?
As that day, I mean, it was following something crazy that I did. And it's like, how in the world could you do that? And I think at that day, we both realized, look, we both feel unloved. We both want to love each other. And because we've been feeling this miss for so long, there is that resentment that was built up, and that did fuel a lot of the bad outcomes that we were seeing at the time. But realizing that we really do both love each other, and we really do actually have a lot at stake. We have a lot to lose, and we have all of the elements, all the bones of a phenomenal marriage. We just need to help each other feel loved. And since we weren't doing that effectively, we were getting the results we were getting, even though we were, checking a lot of boxes and from a lot of people outside looking in thinking, obviously before the disaster, that we had like the perfect marriage. And we even would think, hey, we have a great marriage. We never thought we had a bad marriage because we were doing things for each other. We just weren't doing the things that each other needed. And I think that's one of the profound messages that, that sentence, can love come back to a marriage? The answer is absolutely. But you have to do it in a way that resonates with your spouse, or else it won't. You can be doing all the right things, but it might not be the right things for your spouse.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us on the Value Script today. Don't forget to click, like, share, and subscribe. And we look forward to seeing you next time on the Value Script.